Hello and welcome to The Unfiltered Experience with Tara and Louisa. We are two girls who speak the truth about the struggle of never feeling enough whilst growing up in a world of filters and comparison. Here we will have raw, relatable and authentic conversations to empower you on your path to self-development. Come with us on the journey of unlearning. Just before we get into the episode, we just want to start with a clear trigger warning. In this episode, we'll be discussing themes about narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding. For anyone that's experienced any sort of control or abuse in relationships, just be mindful when listening to this episode. Welcome back to The Unfiltered Experience. Today, we are getting into the episode. We are discussing Week 4 of our course content. We are continuing on with the toxic relationship. So week 4 is about the nature of your toxic relationship. And so last week we discussed one of my toxic relationships and my story with that. And then this week we're doing my other toxic relationship, but we're going to tackle it from a bit of a different perspective and go into sort of an educational standpoint around that relationship. So today we're discussing trauma bonding, which is basically the bond that happens when you're in a relationship with someone that is narcissistic. So I know there's a bit of a misconception. I mean, for me, when I first heard the term trauma bond before I had read this book, which I will go into, I thought trauma bond meant something nice in the sense that I had bonded with someone over a trauma. So, for example, I thought Tara and I were trauma bonded because we'd both been through similar experiences. However, when I was on my own therapeutic journey of healing from this relationship, which I still am 5.5 years later, my therapist presented me with this book called Trauma Bonding by Lauren Kozlowski. And it's a very small book, so if anyone is in this situation or relates to any of the content today, please grab it. But we thought we would sort of highlight points of it and give the information out in a pretty easy and digestible way just to spread awareness about this dynamic, because it is really common and it's also really soul destroying. We'll leave a copy of the book link in the show notes. So if you relate and you want to learn more, please go ahead and read her book. But what we'll do first is get into the stages of the trauma bond. The stages for me was such an eye-opening experience because it was like my life was in a book. I was like, have they, been watching me and like put this down on paper? I think like understanding sort of the science or like the psychology behind something like narcissistic abuse and trauma bonds is so important because one, it validates you and your experience, but two, it makes you feel like less alone and it gives you the power to heal because a big part of narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding is the denial of your reality. And for me, I still today grapple with this sort of tug of war between myself about what was real and what wasn't and what was my fault and what wasn't. And when you read something like this or you get information like this that'll be in this podcast, it cuts through that denial and it cuts through that story that it's your fault and that you could have been different or you weren't enough or, it just cuts through that gaslighting and that sort of feeling of insanity. So the beginning, now this is something that's so important to remember. And I think like for anyone that's listening to this episode and hasn't been through a trauma bond, hasn't been through a narcissistic abusive relationship, or has a friend or a family member or someone they know has been in that situation, this is such a key point of information. And like the other day, I actually was getting my partner to read this book so he could better understand what I'd been through. And the biggest key point about this cycle is that the beginning of the relationship looks very different to how it does at the end. The beginning of the relationship, you are showered with love bombing, validation, admiration, Everything about you is special and spectacular, and you develop a sense of love and trust for this person. That is the key ingredient in a narcissistic abusive relationship, because if someone's abusive to you from the get-go, you're not going to become attached to them. That is a part of the manipulation and the cycle and the harm, is that this person, yes, they become horrible towards you and they bring you down, but they also give you breadcrumbs of love and validation, and that becomes intoxicating because it becomes glimmers of the start. So the first, I don't know, however long, it varies for different relationships, but for me, it was probably about a month and a half where this person really showered me with so much love, and everything I thought was funny, everything I listened to was such great taste. Everything about me was special, and I was really built up to be this like worthy, loving human being. Stage 1 is love bombing. So the narc will shower you with love, affection, attention, and validation. So the book describes that it feels like fairy tale-like. You feel utterly adored and cared for. There's an abundance of love and affection, and it's nothing you've ever experienced before. It's unlike any other honeymoon period. Most people will hold back and give little pieces of affection and vulnerability as they continue to date, whereas the narcissist will offer this like almost straight away. So they'll give you everything.
And that's the addictive part of this cycle, because it feels so overwhelmingly good that you want that over and over again. And I think they do it in such a charming way that it's not smothering. Like it's very specific to your vulnerability. So whatever it is that you're feeling about yourself, they pick up on that and they really shower you, like you said, with that love to fulfill that hole. So for me, it was like specific to my family dynamic. So it was like, oh, you've lost your father. Like, let me just like be that role model to you. Let me be all the love to you. And it's like specific to that little part of my life that was missing.
Yeah, they're very calculated at knowing how to appease your insecurity. So then stage 2 is trust and dependency. You begin to trust that they will love you unconditionally always. You now start to depend on them for validation. Stage 2 is about where they gain your trust, which can develop into a dependency. So healthy love and a healthy dependency are part of a nurturing relationship, but the kind of dependency the narcissist manifests in you is entirely unhealthy. So you begin to trust them so much that their opinion becomes one source of validation. This is where the next stage takes effect, which is stage 3, the criticism begins. The narcissist gradually reduces the amount of care and validation that they once gave you. They start to criticize you and place heavy blame on you for the things that you have no control over, like your insecurities. They pull away from you emotionally, which makes you feel like you're going insane. The thought of losing them is beyond gut-wrenching. What makes this even more painful is the criticism, nasty comments, and blame they begin to heap upon you. Because this is so foreign and your spouse or partner had always been so good to you, you believe that what they're saying is absolutely true. You don't understand this at the time, but you believing their hurtful comments is something the narcissist banks on. After all, they need to chip away at your morale and self-esteem to reach stage 4. So you can see you've gone from this love bombing, beautiful relationship. You trust this person because you feel like after everything that they've said and done that they're not going to leave you, and they've shown you how much they love you, so you trust and depend on them. And then they start to take that away. And it's subtle. And instead of turning on them, you start to question yourself.
Because of course it has to be a problem with you. It can't be a problem with them.
Yeah, they've been nothing but nice to me.
Exactly. They've just adored me from day one. Like, so this is a problem with me. This is something that I have to change. And I think when they specifically target like a self-esteem issue that we have, because that's usually the core root of why we attract a narcissist in the first place, where they target that it's really easy to believe them, because it's an attack on our self-esteem, which is something that we're probably lacking a lot of in the first place.
Well, 100%. That's what, I mean, I'm really talking about my therapy now, but my therapist explained to me that the wound was already there. I already had this low self-worth, and then that is a perfect storm for somebody that's going to reaffirm that. often like we have these sort of pre-existing childhood experiences and then we attract men that reflect those experiences or women or whoever. And often you won't see someone with no sort of pre-existing experiences get into a relationship like this, or definitely not long term.
Yeah. And I think as well, they're really good at isolating you from your peers and your external life, so that when they do put you in this position that we're probably about to talk about, you're not very aware of what it would be like from another person's perspective. So it's like what they say, think and feel is your entire world. That's all you know about yourself. So it's like you're so dependent on what they think about you and needing them because, yeah, subtly, like without knowing it, they've isolated you from the people around you.
Yeah, and I think as well it's like because there's already that self-esteem issue, then you find someone that tells you that that's not the case. It's intoxicating. It's addictive. Stage 4 is gaslighting. The narcissist will tell you that their unhappiness is all your fault. If you would only do exactly as they say, they would be able to love you like they used to. They will aim and often succeed in making you doubt your own perception of reality and accepting their interpretation of reality. So gaslighting at its core is basically psychological manipulation to make their victim doubt their own sanity.
Very powerful.
If you've ever been told, I didn't say that, you always make things up, or you've got it wrong again, that didn't happen, or you definitely told me this, despite you knowing the truth of the situation, you've been exposed to this form of manipulation. Then you begin to believe the narc's version of events over your own sanity. It sounds almost unbelievable that someone else can hold this type of mental control over you, but it's entirely possible, and it's a horrible, poisonous form of abuse. Without going too much into it, I feel like gaslighting is the form of abuse that stays with you, because when you've had someone that you're attached to and that you love so much deny your truth to that degree consistently over time, you lose the ability to trust yourself. The voice of self-doubt stays with you past the relationship ending. And that's where therapy and self-development is so necessary, because I feel like half the work of coming out of a narcissistic relationship is just learning to trust yourself again and learning how to trust your decisions, trust your feelings, trust reality. Like, I know for me still, if I have a conflict with someone, I need to talk to someone else about it, because I need to know that that was an okay response. I remain still with this level of lack of trust within myself and my own perception of events. And it can manifest in of like, I need a lot of validation from other people to tell me that what I'm doing is right or what I'm doing is wrong, because I just have this like inherent thing that I just can't trust what I think and say, especially in emotional situations. And usually gaslighting happens in an emotional state or in an argument from a narcissist.
And I think the thing with gaslighting, and you spoke about needing to check your reality with people to know that this is okay or what you're feeling's right. On the other side, for me, like, I just cut off from everybody because I don't want to know. I don't want to talk to you because I don't know if I can trust you. And that was a response to me being gaslit over a long period of time, where it was like, I don't even know if I can trust the people that I love anymore. And so if I just don't do anything with anybody, then that will protect me and keep me safe, which is another... It's such a robbed opportunity of me to experience like love and friendship and stuff in my life, because I'm just so afraid of being hurt.
I think as well, there's also another ingredient to gaslighting. Like, there is that level of, there's that first stage, which is I'm denying that happened, or I'm denying that I said that, or whatever. I'm saying no. But then there's that second stage of, and it's your fault, and I'm blaming it back onto you. And why would you bring that up though? There's that sort of, that's that manipulation that feels so terrifying and feels so, what's the word? Just...
Yeah, it's attacking. Like, you feel
Well, it creates such an unsafe space, because if I bring up how I feel, or I call you out, or I speak my truth, then not only am I going to have my truth denied and invalidated, but I'm also going to have it be pushed back onto me about how horrible I am or something wrong that I've done. So you begin to just like hate yourself.
Well, it fosters guilt and shame, more guilt and shame of yourself, because you think, oh, here we go, I've done it again. You know, like I've messed this up again. This is my fault again. Even when we're trying to reach a point of resolution in the conflict or in the relationship, it's like I'm constantly being put back in a position where I'm at fault again. And not only does that create unsafety in the relationship, but it also, it makes us feel shameful about ourselves, which is not beneficial to the relationship either.
Yeah, and that is the cycle, because it's like you feel worse about yourself, so you become more attached to their validation, so you hang around and just like cop more mistreatment until you get that sort of positive reinforcement at some point.
And usually that positive reinforcement comes from you saying sorry, which creates like a really unsafe dynamic. Because we end up apologising for something we have no idea we even did because it wasn't true. And then we learn that gives us what we want. So we learn to do that over and over again, is to just say, oh, you're right and I'm sorry, which denies our own needs.
Oh, it just tells our inner child that we're not worthy of anything. Stage 5, control is set. You feel like your only chance of getting back to the happy, comforting feeling of stage 1 is to do things the narc's way, which is exactly what you just said.
True, I didn't even know that was coming.
You so desperately want to be back at stage 1. You want to be adored, loved, cared for, told you're special, perfect. You want to feel like you're important again, and the narc knows this. They also know that you'll do what they say in the glimmer of hope that they'll return to the love bomber they once were. They'll dangle this like a carrot in front of you, making sure they get what they want from you in return of that slight slither of hope that they'll revert to adoring you again.
There's the apology to gain them back on side, because you're so afraid of what they're like when they're not on side that you'll do absolutely anything and everything to keep the peace.
Stage 6, loss of self. Things get worse, not better, and you resign yourself to accepting their abuse. Stage 6 is where you are entirely confused, miserable, and your self-esteem is at an all-time low. This is the most heartbreaking stage, as you become a shell of a being. You're alive and breathing, but you're an emotional corpse, feeling dead inside. Compare the person you are at stage 6 to the person you were before you met your abuser. It's like night and day. Dreams, hopes, goals, and desires become mute at this point. You no longer have any. The one thing that you want is for the abuse to stop, and you'll do anything for that to happen, even if it means doing things you don't want to do, at the narc's request. Stage 6 is a dangerous place to be. I feel like that stage is like the rock bottom.
Stage 6?
Yeah. That's like after the endurance of that cycle for a long period of time, you just get to this point where you aren't allowed to be yourself. That was my experience. Like I wasn't allowed to be anything that person didn't want me to be. And I, had to do things that I didn't want to do because I was so attached to wanting it to be stage 1 and wanting to be loved. Stage 7, addiction. Your family and friends are undeniably concerned about your welfare. You cannot leave because your abuser is now everything to you. All you can think about is winning their affections and validation. At this point, it's highly probable that you're cut off from your family and friends, but that doesn't stop you feeling awful about not seeing them. Even if it was your choice to cut them off, it's likely that it was the narc that was driving the force behind that. You may miss your family, friends, and the life you left behind for your abuser, and the guilt and shame you feel about that can be often all-consuming. This is what the narcs strive for all along, your addiction to them. This means they have the power and control they strive for all along, and they know pretty much nothing and nobody can take you away from them. They can hurt you, cheat, lie, and act unashamedly toxic, and you'll stick around and endure it. This is the end goal achieved for the narcissist. You may be asking yourself, much like I did, how it's possible that this can happen to you, a sane, logical, and intelligent person like you. The answer to this question is the same for all of us who've endured such abuse. It comes from understanding the core dynamics of how we humans react to the combination of dependency and abuse, coupled with something called intermittent reinforcement, which we've discussed on another episode, but I'll just quickly recap for anyone that hasn't listened to that. Basically, it's the pattern of validation. So usually in a relationship, if you do something and they reinforce love and validation to you, it's because of a certain behavior. Say you buy them flowers, they might say thank you, right? Like you can trust that that's what you're going to receive. Whereas for a narcissist, one day you might give them flowers and they might say thank you, and then the next day they might abuse you for doing that same activity. So the goalposts change with no pattern. So you're constantly waiting for the next reinforcement of validation. You don't know when or what will give you that validation because it changes. Like you just there's no pattern to it. Whereas, in normal relationships, you can sort of have an expectation on what will give you love and what won't.
And a good thing to note as well about reinforcement is there was a psychological paper that came out talking about intimacy in relationships, and this is talking about a healthy relationship versus sort of an unhealthy relationship. But they say that if your partner gives you 5 times out of 6, they give you a healthy response, 4 times out of 6, they give you a healthy response, or 6 times out of 6, you can trust that in that 1 or 2 times that they don't give you a healthy response, that it's coming from a place of their own stuff. Like they're coming home work stressed, they've got their own issues, they're in their own emotions. But when the ship starts to tilt and they start to give you a 3 versus a 2 versus a 1 out of 6, that's when you start to feel unsafe in what you're going to get from your partner. And that's when you become reliant on that intermittent reinforcement, because it's like you become addicted to that validation. Is it something to do with me? It's something to do with the relationship. Whereas when it's a 5 out of 6, they come home and usually 5 times out of 6 they're happy, then you can trust in that one time that it's got nothing to do with you. But I think, when you enter into a toxic relationship and it's half or even less, that's when we become reliant on needing that other person.
So that is part 1 of our education on trauma bonding and narcissistic relationships. We create this episode with a lot of love and compassion for anyone that has endured anything close to that. There's obviously help available. We'll put links in the show notes, but
I want to give you a big hug.
We just want to give you a big hug and just give as much compassion to yourself, because I think we'll go into it in another episode, but there is a psychological and physiological attachment that goes into play in these things that doesn't necessarily make logical sense. And I think a lot of people can not understand that if they haven't been through it. I know I've said this before, but if you're in that, or someone in that, try and give them some love and grace, because it is so over consuming and overwhelming. And we hope that this podcast helps you feel validated in your experience,
which is something that helped us along our journey. So we want to extend that to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode.
If you liked it, please share it with someone you think would benefit from it, or share it on your socials and tag us.
If you don't already, follow us on TikTok and Instagram to stay up to date with us and our latest self-development courses.
Thank you for listening.